This episode of New Politics was released on the 5th of July, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Whadjuk people.
Hello to our audience and hello to you, David. Hope you're going well and surviving the big wet of Sydney.
Thanks, Eddie. I certainly damp around here, but it's okay. That's our fourth once-in-a-100-year rainfall in 3 years.
And just as well, climate change is not a real thing, David.
These people making money from climate research, when clearly it's perfectly normal and sane and usual.
Well, the world of politics is also normal and sane as well, and we've got a lot coming up in today's episode. The obsession about a meeting between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump, that's still going on. We're discussing the police beating of Hannah Thomas at a pro-Palestine protest and police violence in New South Wales in general. Quotas to get more women in the Liberal Party and truth-telling in Victoria. So there's a lot to talk about today in this mad world of politics, David.
I'm excited.
There's been this big obsession about whether the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will be meeting up with the United States President Donald Trump, and it's almost like a dating game at the moment, a little bit like Farmer Gets a Wife or Married at First Sight, take your pick. But it's been absolutely relentless. Here's the smart people over at 7 West Sunrise program ramping up this question about meeting up with Donald Trump.
Well, the Prime Minister is hoping the new financial year will deliver a long-awaited face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump, and there's plenty to discuss with the US President.
Let's get into it. Anthony Albanese joins us now live from Canberra. PM, good morning to you. Nice to see
PM.
you. Look, every Quad leader has met him. It's all got a little bit embarrassing, hasn't it? Pretty simple question. When are you going to meet the Donald?
Look, we will meet when we meet in coming months, but my priority has been on delivering for Australians, and today is a day of delivery.
All right, we were going to come to all of that, but you've now got it out of your system. So let's go back to the first question that Carl asked.
He has got it out of his system.
In coming months, you said, in terms of meeting Donald Trump, do you have a date? It sounds a bit open-ended, in coming months.
Well, it is at this point in time, but we'll have a meeting. We've had a few constructive discussions. I'm sure when we meet, it will be constructive as well. As you know, the President left the G7 because there was a war going on with Iran and Israel.
And there's also this obsession about other Quad leaders from India and Japan meeting with Donald Trump, but Anthony Albanese hasn't. There is a Quad leaders meeting scheduled towards the end of the year, so I'm not sure why a meeting with Donald Trump can't actually wait until then. And now the opposition is throwing in a little bit of China bashing, with Angus Taylor criticising Albanese for meeting Xi Jinping first.
He's more interested and more able to get a meeting with the President of China than the President of the United States.
And this is in the context of Australia getting an exemption, or trying to get an exemption from the trade tariffs that have been imposed by the United States on every country in the world. There is a 90-day pause on all countries except for China, and that will end next week. So it's hard to know what will all happen here, because Donald Trump will make a decision one day, change it in the afternoon, deny that he's ever made a decision in the first place, and then deny that he's ever denied it. So he is a leader who would be difficult to negotiate with anyway, and most of the economic analysis suggests that this will damage the United States more than anyone else in the short term, and more than likely in the long term. But with all of this uncertainty that's going on, I think it would be better for Australia to start looking for more favourable markets all around the world and drumming up support with other key allies, because it's just so hard to predict what will happen with the United States. And a meeting with Trump isn't going to change very much of that.
Last week we mentioned that we were dealing with the modern world with post-World War II structures. We mentioned the Security Council in particular as being perhaps outdated in its membership, if not its model. And it's the same now. We're looking to America free from any pangs of kinship to Britain, which John Curtin said in 1943. It's now 2025. We can't look to the United States anymore. The United States seems to be turning into a rogue state and possibly a failed state. Alliances are important, and historical alliances are something that we should try and preserve, but we don't have to preserve them as they were. It's time for Australia to look to its own area, becoming and maintaining the superpower in the Asia Pacific, acknowledging that the future is probably Chinese. Even if it's not Chinese, China is going to be a major player in the world over the next 40 years and is still our biggest trade partner or second biggest trade partner. Indonesia, that diverse country of 200 million people, needs to be more friend than foe. We have a responsibility to, I don't want to get all Kipling white man's burden here. Australia, as the wealthier partner, has a responsibility to make sure that the Pacific Islands are looked after economically, environmentally, culturally, preserving the cultures of the islands, while all the while helping them be viable, livable areas in which the people there remain happy and peaceful and prosperous. This obsession with meeting Trump is a throwback. It's not Menzies getting knocked back by Roosevelt or even Howard being knocked back by Clinton. It's Anthony Albanese being caught by circumstances that are a bit beyond his control.
Oh, and I think we can see that this is just the usual media beat up as well, and there's not much substance behind this. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he did express regret over the cancelled bilateral meeting that Albanese and Trump were meant to have at the G7 meeting last month, and he expressed that regret to Penny Wong at their Quad meeting in Washington during the week. So it's not really a big deal, but it is a big deal to the usual suspects in the mainstream media and the Liberal Party, who are just so keen to frame these types of events as a grand failure of leadership. And there's all these bizarre aspects to all of this. There's also those suggestions that all of this supposed reluctance to meet Albanese is because Kevin Rudd is Australia's ambassador to the United States and said some very bad words about Donald Trump when he said that Trump is a village idiot and a traitor to the West. He said that he's the most destructive president in US history. He's incoherent and in love with dictators. And these are some of the better things he said. JD Vance said that Donald Trump is unfit for America's highest office and would become America's version of Adolf Hitler. And he also said this:
because I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place. I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
So if that didn't stop JD Vance from becoming the Vice President of the United States, and a lot of those things that have been said by either Kevin Rudd or JD Vance have actually come to fruition, so it shouldn't stop Kevin Rudd from saying all of those things. It actually seems to be a recipe for success at the moment. So there were also some suggestions that Donald Trump is avoiding a meeting with Anthony Albanese because he's reluctant to increase defence spending to 2.4% of GDP or 3.5% or whatever they're asking for. I think it's up to 5% now. But whatever the case is, Australia is the one who should decide all of this, not the United States. And there's just a lot of hot air blowing around on this particular issue.
It's
it's almost like every reason under the sun is given for this love at first sight meeting between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump that's yet to occur.
Yeah, Australia isn't as high a priority to the US president as we like to think it is. And I know all the right things get said till this president where anything can be said. But I don't think Bill Clinton's first or George W. Bush's first thoughts in the morning were, oh, gee, I wonder if they've fixed that pothole on Collins Street in Melbourne yet. Better chase him up and find out what's happening there. And hello to all our Melbourne listeners. That's an important issue, but not to the US president. It's just bizarre. And it's almost as if, and the real cynic in me says that it's almost as if the Prime Minister here is doing the work that the right approve of, but they don't want to actually say that. So they're finding anything at all they can stick that will stick with him. And not being able to get a meeting with the US president, all the while getting meetings with Xi Jinping. Now, Xi Jinping's not a terribly admirable figure either, but he's the leader of the most populous country in the world and our biggest trading partner. Getting meetings with Modi of India. Again, I'm not a fan of Modi, but he's extremely popular in India. Also, India is the second most populous and an important trade nation here. Also an important nation culturally. Like China, there are many people of Chinese and Indian extraction in Australia, probably more than of American. In fact, definitely more than of American extraction. And so we need to acknowledge that these countries, and the right needs to acknowledge that these countries are important. And in fact, I think we might be digging towards what the issue is here, that Trump is an Anglo-Saxon or European descent, whereas Xi and Modi are not. And so I'm wondering if we've still got a little bit of the we don't deal with, which should have been destroyed in the 40s with people like Nehru and Gandhi and Nasser and all those people who showed themselves to be people of substance.
And I think that's probably the big issue there, David, this idea that there is the shifting dynamics of international power. And I think that's essentially what the backdrop is to all of this trade and tariff war that's going on at the moment. And I think we also have to stop all of this stuff about all the way with DJT that's going on at the moment. And there's also those continuing grand expectations that everything is going to change if only Albanese could have that face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump. And in reality, that is just not going to happen. Anything that changes in the United States is either going to come from within Donald Trump's head or political pressures coming in from lobbyists or political strategists from within the United States, worried about how this fallout will affect the results of the midterm elections next year. And we've been saying this for some time. Australia does need to look elsewhere. You talked about it before, David. China is Australia's largest trading partner and far more relevant to Australia's future than the United States is. Yet no one is berating Albanese for not having held a meeting with Xi Jinping yet. In fact, they're berating him for meeting with Xi Jinping before Donald Trump, and that's a meeting that's taking place in Beijing next month. But the bigger point is that Australia should be looking towards China and beyond. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like that, but that's what we need to do. It should be diversifying its diplomatic and economic interests. We cannot control what Donald Trump is going to do or going to not do. And I think because of that, it is important for Australia to start thinking more strategically about its global partnerships and its alliances.
There's what we want and what is. And unfortunately, in international politics, what we want can be unattainable and impossible. What is what we have to deal with. I'm neither here nor there on dealing with China and India, in that I think that we have to do it because that's the way the world is shaping, or at least we have to be prepared to do it. If something happens in the States and it all turns around and it goes back to being the nation it never quite was, but was always heading towards, perhaps my mind will change a bit. But as far as I can see, this obsession the right has with America is at least 20 years out of date, at least, and is damaging to Australian interests.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis. You can also find us at newpolitics.com.au, and you can also support us through Patreon and Substack.
What kind of legislation is empowering you to do this? Can you name it, please? Because this is actually counter to LEFRA. We haven't actually... Mate. Oi! No.
Let go of her! Can you let go of her, please? Let go of her! Please let go of her!
There There was an incident during the week in the west of Sydney, and that was when police beat up the former Australian Greens candidate, Hannah Thomas, who was part of a peaceful protest and picket line at SEC Plating in Belmore, which manufactures plating, engineering coatings and finishes for the F-35 fighter jets used by Israel in their attacks on the people of Gaza. This protest was organised by the Weapons Out of the West group, which campaigns against weapons production in Western Sydney. And there's actually a surprising amount of weapons and war manufacture in Western Sydney. There's quite a lot of it there, and I was quite surprised to hear about that. But first of all, there's the absolute police brutality. Hannah Thomas was severely beaten by the police and may end up losing her eye. And generally, people do have a right to protest. But because it was an anti-Israel and anti-war protest, police decided that it was best to attack pro-Palestine supporters, and they justified this police brutality under move-on orders and the draconian places of worship legislation that was introduced earlier this year by the Minns government in New South Wales. And this is what happens when police are given too many powers. And we did warn about this when the laws first came into place, David, and this is the end result.
Just awful. I mean, I live not very far from the demonstration. I didn't see it, but we now have a young woman who's at risk of losing an eye. And even if she's not at risk, even if her lawyers have put that in as a low-risk possibility, her face has been disfigured. She's gone through a lot of discomfort and pain and gone through a very traumatic experience. Whether we agree with her or not is beside the point. The police have no right to do this. And the building across the road is owned by a church, but it's for youth groups. I've never seen a church service in there. I do see youth groups go into it, and they have other things happen, dances and things like that. It's an indictment on the Minns Labor government that they folded to this pressure and brought in this stupid, unworkable law. You know, a place of worship, what is that? Ask any Buddhist what a place of worship is. It's everywhere. And there are Buddhist extremists who have used acts of terror in the past, as there are Hindu extremists, and of course they're not really true Hindus or Buddhists in the same way that those committing genocide in Palestine aren't truly Jewish. Christian nationalists cutting healthcare and kicking into the poor aren't really Christians. The rules aren't that hard to follow, at least mechanically. From a personal belief, honouring thy God, etc., might be hard for people to follow, and that's okay. But they're pretty clear. Look after yourselves, look after each other, treat everyone else like you'd like to be treated. Don't judge anyone. This is consistent across all the major religions. The language is different and the cultural context is a bit different and the approach is a bit different, but that's what it is.
Just as a background to all of this, and as I said, we did warn about this legislation. People do need to listen to us more often, David, but this is what happens when dangerous laws are brought in under false pretences and how they can quickly become weaponised. And in New South Wales, these new laws were rushed in earlier this year after that thoroughly discredited incident in Yoorrook on the outskirts of Sydney, where a caravan was supposedly filled with explosives, along with unsubstantiated claims of a coordinated attack on synagogues in Sydney. And since that time, we found out that all of those reports were false. They were totally false, and the New South Wales government knew that those reports were false, yet they continued to implement this new legislation. And I guess they were just doing anything at all to appease the Zionist lobby in Sydney. And over the years, police in New South Wales have been handed this increased level of power, and you have to ask the question, well, who does this power serve? It's essentially to protect the elite interests. They protect the wealth class, the property class, and the Israel lobby in Sydney. So that means that if you are protesting against war, particularly Israel's assault on Gaza, well, the police are going to come in and beat you up. So this is not just a ban on protest. This is a ban on a particular style of political opinion that the government just doesn't like. And it's very targeted and it's very deliberate.
Again, the Minns government in New South Wales has a lot to answer for. Tony Burke made some comments, and I couldn't work out why Tony Burke was involved at all, except that it's in his seat of Watson, and he was asked about it. And this isn't the way Labor should be. Labor should be on the side of the protester, even when they don't agree with the protests. Labor should be on the side of peaceful protest, because that's how Labor got there. I know we can talk about Chifley in 1946 with the miners.
Well, there's also Jack Mundey with the Green movement.
And the way they treated Jack was just appalling. He was right. He's rightly now seen as a hero of the left and a great Australian by many people who wouldn't agree with him anyway. The Green Bans saved a lot of Sydney from greedy developers. We need Jack Mundey now to stop it again, or a modern Jack Mundey. How they could be talked into such unworkable, stupid laws, and now we have a badly injured young woman. And of all the people too, she'd stood against Anthony Albanese in the seat of Grayndler. So she's a known quantity publicly, at least in the area. Grayndler's next door to Watson. And it goes down to a problem in New South Wales Police. I will always be on the side of the honest local police officer who has to deal with the worst of humanity every day and does their very best. Those who are there to genuinely help. And that, I think, is the majority of police officers in New South Wales. But there are just way too many, and one is too many, who will tase an old lady because he's had enough, who will bash a young woman because they think they're protected by an unworkable law that caused issues. I think we need a clean out in New South Wales of every senior person in government and the public service, and to start again. Some of them will make it back in, of course. There are some very good people at the top of New South Wales Public Service. But the New South Wales Police Service is rotting from the inside by the looks of things. The culture encourages thuggery. They got rid of the New South Wales Police Commissioner seemingly because she was a woman, and they're bringing in another old boy, wet telephone book. You look suspicious, come to the station. Oh, what have we found here? And again, it doesn't reflect modern attitudes towards policing. The police should be there to help.
I'm just going back to the legislation, because this is the first time that places of worship legislation has been tested in New South Wales, essentially. Now, it might all sound pretty simple. People should be able to go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or wherever else they need to go and do whatever they need to do in peace. But it's a complex mess of loose definitions and discretionary powers provided for the police. Now, there's over 4,000 churches in New South Wales, and there's so many more locations that can be vaguely defined as being places of worship. And within the legislation, there's no definition of what constitutes being near a place of worship. It could be next door, it could be on the next street, it could be in the next suburb. There's just no clear definition of what near a place of worship actually means. And in the case of that protest outside SEC plating in Belmore, well, as you mentioned before, David, it was across the road from the Embassy Church, and that's actually an annex from its main church in Punchbowl. Doesn't even look like a church. It's mainly for workshops. It wasn't even open on that day. It had nothing to do with the protest, and it wasn't even targeted. So the police can actually decide that anything is a place of worship. So if you're running something like the Church of the Cowboy Baby Jesus from your lounge room, and David, I did look it up, there is actually a Church of the Cowboy Baby Jesus in Australia. The police can say that your protest is near a place of worship and then go on and beat the living daylights out of you.
Yeah, and this is so wrong. And how far is it before they go after religions that they mightn't like?
Jedi is a religion, according to the Australian census.
Jedi is a religion. Well, yes. I don't think it's officially sanctioned, but you can put yourself down as a Jedi. And, of course, the Jedis are the rebels against the Empire. And the irony is that a lot of the people in charge don't see irony. So it wouldn't surprise me if we get a group of teenagers dressed as Jedi Knights being beaten up for protesting in front of an establishment. I noted too that there was a sort of start of, she was anti-Semitic, she was this. But when the extent of her injuries came out, a lot of that stopped. There was also the idea that, it was supposed to be a right eye, but the bandage was over a left eye, without understanding that the camera reverses the image. So the right eye becomes the left eye. It's just really upsetting that. And look, I think, okay, you probably maybe shouldn't disrupt the average worshipper of whatever religious stripe going to their weekly ritual, whether it be in a church or a mosque or a synagogue or a temple or what have you. But that can be covered under different things. And that's not to say we shouldn't protest against churches when they do the wrong thing, or any religious body when it does the wrong thing. Being public institutions, they need public criticism too. But protests can and have been stopped peacefully. And why should a peaceful protest be stopped anyway?
Well, this protest wasn't anything to do with a place of worship anyway, and I guess that's the key point. But the big point is that the Albanese government keeps on insisting that there is no military link between Australia and Israel's IDF, but that's complete rubbish. That site in Belmore is one of around 20 sites in Sydney that manufactures material for the Israel Defence Forces, and there's actually around 70 sites all across Australia, and that's where parts for those F-35 fighter jets are being manufactured. Australia's contribution to that program is worth around $4.1 billion, and those jets are being used in the genocide of Gaza. So that's the issue. Where's the accountability for all of this? Tony Burke says that no one is above the law when he was talking about the police bashing of Hannah Thomas, but why is Tony Burke above the law? Why is Anthony Albanese above the law?
Why is the thug who hit her above the law? I mean, again, when we hear of the occasional police shooting, I'm very slow to comment because I wasn't there, I don't know. Till the details come out, you shouldn't judge. But the details are out on this. It was a peaceful protest. The film is out. We heard the film at the beginning of the segment. Hannah Thomas did nothing wrong. And if Hannah Thomas was a member of One Nation protesting immigration and they did this, I'd be just as appalled. If she was holding a peaceful display, I would disagree vehemently with her.
Oh, but most of the police force are signed up One Nation members.
But my point is that a peaceful protest should not end in the hospitalisation of a protester. Now, yeah, had she thrown a rock at the police or had she hit the police in any threatening way or had she drawn a gun on the police, maybe things then would be different. She did none of that. And I hope she's okay. I hope she's able to preserve her eye. And I hope she can get back to doing what she was doing. And I hope that the full force of the police internal affairs comes down on the people who did that to her, because we don't need those types of people in the New South Wales police force or any police force.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
Getting more women into Parliament for the Liberal Party should be a pretty straightforward thing to do, but they're in a state of bother because they can't work out a way of doing this. At the recent federal election, the Liberal Party ended up with only 6 women in the lower house, and it's not just a problem at the federal level. Across Australia, the parliamentary representation of women in the Liberal Party is just 32%. And it's an issue that will have to change and change quite dramatically. Here's the leader of the Liberal Party, Susan Lee, speaking at the National Press Club.
Our party must pre-select more women in winnable seats so that we see more Liberal women in federal parliament. Now, I'm agnostic on specific methods to make it happen, but I am a zealot that it actually does happen. Current approaches have clearly not worked, so I'm open to any approach that will. If some state divisions choose to implement quotas, that's fine. If others don't, that's also fine. But what is not fine is not having enough women.
And quotas have worked out very, very well for the Labor Party. They were introduced in 1994, so it took 31 years to achieve this. But now they have got gender parity across Australia. It's actually 53%, and 56% of the federal caucus and a majority of the cabinet is made up of women. But there's resistance to quotas in the Liberal Party, and that resistance is already starting to gain some traction. Here's the Liberal Party's Angus Taylor again.
Well, we should take substantial action, but I'm saying that subverting democratic processes through quotas is not the right way to do it. I think you've got to work with democratic processes. I'm a big believer in democracy in organisations like ours and in a country like ours, of course. And so I don't think subverting those processes is the right way forward. But we do need to take substantial action more broadly as well. I mean, making sure we are representative of the communities across Australia. And I don't think we have been as representative as we need to be. This is something I've personally crusaded on for some time, and I'll continue to, including women. I mean, even in my own office, I've made a real point of this.
And I've got the feeling that all the women in the office of Angus Taylor are busy taking coffee orders and probably not doing much more than that. But aside from that, the Western Australian branch is already digging in, insisting that its existing pre-selection processes are already very strong. Well, that obviously hasn't worked because there's still a basket case over in Western Australia. But this really has to change. They've talked about it for a long time, but nothing has changed. And they do have a woman as the federal Liberal Party leader. Well, that's a start, but nothing is going to change until they change the structures of the party. And based on the reaction that we've seen during the week, that might not be happening for some time to come.
There's probably some rule we could formulate about the louder you moan about quotas, the less likely you are to be able to get in on your own merits anyway. Angus Taylor is one of the more problematic members of Parliament with his water dealings, his attempt to get his wife to be Lord Mayor of Sydney by forging some documents. Why he's still in is quite amazing, let alone be seen as a serious contender for leadership of the party. Is one of those things that just makes no sense to me, except, and of course, a quota of 50% of women. And I shudder to think how many capable women have been locked out. And by capable women, I mean capable people by the cartel who are scared of capable women in particular, but capable people. They're rat cunning, but they're not terribly bright. Hal Taylor was a Rhodes Scholarship, although Chris Christopherson said it best after him and Bill Clinton, does the Rhodes Scholarship have any credibility at all? Australia says, hold my beer, Tony Abbott, Angus Taylor.
Oh, but I think that generally Parliament should be a reflection of the nation. If democracy is to function properly, and of course we talked about that in our great book, Fixing Australian Politics. It's all available on Amazon at the moment. But you do want to have as many people as possible to participate in the democratic processes. And Labor is doing okay on gender equity. It's still got some more work to do with diversity, but as far as diversity is concerned, it's still way ahead of the Liberal Party. And of course, you're going to have some anomalies with this sort of situation when you've got one person representing 100,000 people in each electorate. For example, in Blaxland, around 31% of the electorate identifies as Islamic, yet the seat is represented by a white Anglo guy in Jason Clare. And I'm pretty sure that he was Islamic. He'd have a lot more to say about what's going on in the Middle East. But aside from this sort of issue, the goal is to have a diverse parliament. And on gender, it took Labor 31 years of quotas to achieve gender equity. So quotas do work, although you could argue that it took too long. 31 years is a long time. But the Liberal Party just seems to be still stuck in the past, insisting that it can't rush this change that it absolutely has to make. And that's absolute crap. The reason why it's resistant to making these changes is because the people who decide the candidates in the Liberal Party pre-selections are predominantly male. So they're going to choose the people who look like them, even if there is a better woman available. And they keep going on about merit. And if that was all truly about merit within the Liberal Party, well, we wouldn't keep seeing these second-rate blokes parachuted in while talented women and diverse voices are just told to wait for their turn, maybe next election or the one after that. And if merit was truly in place within the Liberal Party, well, they wouldn't have that very low number of 28 seats that it currently holds in the federal parliament.
When you look at the class of 49, which had some of the best minds of Australia, not all of them, there were some very good people in the Labor side as well, but you had future attorneys general, you had future foreign ministers who left a stand, you had all kinds of people. Now you look at the shadow opposition of 25 and it's really, and I do hate to say this, but it's really the dregs of what's left. Now, okay, they were in office a long time. They shouldn't have won any of the elections they did because there was very few good people in there, and the few good people in there were pushed aside and shunted aside. And even the Howard's cabinet in 96 had some very capable people in it. Now, were they good people in terms of morals? Yeah. But the Kemps were extremely smart and capable people. Phil Ruddock, I am assured by people who worked with him, was an extremely good and capable developer of policy. Now, what that policy was a different matter altogether, but he did the work of a minister very well and quite impressed the public service with not morally good necessarily, but how functionally good his policy was. And I could point at others who were capable, whose...
No, I hope not too many people have switched off.
No, I hope, I just need to put in, I wish they'd never got in at all. I think they're all terrible people. But we have to acknowledge the strengths as well as the weaknesses. Otherwise, you're not criticising, you're just whinging. John Howard was a very capable Prime Minister. Again, I wish he was never Prime Minister. And Labor has a lot to answer for losing 98. But you don't stay in office for, 11 years. They burned through 3 Prime Ministers in 9 years who were nowhere near the skill of Howard. And again, this is by no means an endorsement of Howard or his policies. But you've got to acknowledge that there was a capability there. And now it's people who are opposing a quota system because they know they'd be the first ones to go.
Oh, absolutely. But the Liberal Party's got so many working models just staring them in the face on gender equity. All they need to do is just look across the chamber at all those people in the lower house next time Parliament sits, and I think that's happening in a few weeks' time. Just look at all those 94 Labor Party members, and over half of them are women. That's the result of quotas. That's what you end up getting if you introduce quotas. Look at the community-backed Teal independents. Their campaigns deliberately sought women candidates, yet we've got the Liberal Party still clinging onto this concept of targets. And these are very soft goals that are pretty much meaningless, and have actually seen their numbers go backwards in Parliament. And as usual, David, we're always here to help the Liberal Party, happy to give a helping hand. And maybe quotas alone are not the answer for the Liberal Party, especially if that's going to take 31 years to get to where they need to be. That's 2056. We're all going to be gone by then. But maybe they just need something a lot more radical. But I think it would be a very simple alternative. Just have women-only pre-selections for the next 2 federal elections. There's no loopholes, no special circumstances, just 2 election cycles where every winnable Liberal Party seat fields a woman candidate. And I think that would signal a real commitment instead of just another false promise of targets announced by Angus Taylor, which are never going to be achieved. And I think there would be strategic benefit for them as well. 2025, I think, is probably Labor's high watermark. They ended up getting 94 seats in Parliament. No one else has ever got that before. I think John Howard might have achieved 94 seats in 1996, but that's an absolutely high watermark. And you never know with today's Liberal Party, but I just can't see Labor getting 94 or more than 94 seats at the next election. So by the time 2028 arrives, the pendulum will start swinging the other way, and the Liberal Party should pick up seats. And you never know. In 2 elections' time, by 2031, they might be able to reach gender equity. So I think that would be a quick fix if they're prepared to do that. But on the past evidence, I'd say that they're not prepared to do that. They're probably not prepared to do anything at all about this.
No, they're not. And if you look at the women who they've promoted over the last 20 years, a lot of them haven't really been up to scratch anyway. Michaelia Cash, Suzanne Ley buying an investment unit on a whim on alleged government business to the Gold Coast. Now, I will be fair, Suzanne Ley has exceeded my expectations as Liberal leader. Those expectations weren't very high, but she hasn't botched anything badly yet. Again, this is not to endorse her policies or her approach or anything. I'm just trying to be fair.
Well, as I said, we're trying to help the Liberal Party here. We're very generous people.
I think so. I'd wait till they get my bill. The Labor quota brought in some very capable women and definitely helped improve the party's electoral prospects. So you'd think it'd be a no-brainer for the Liberal Party, but I think the problem is that instead of being a no-brainer, it went to a committee of no-brains.
Stand on the shoreline, come red, mother wanna cross mine, wanna take it from me. Fire in my eye, but we ain't running. Mother, let's ride. Hey, hey, standing on the shoreline, come red, mother wanna cross mine, wanna take it from me. Fire in my eye, but we ain't running. Mother, let's ride. Hey, hey.
During the week, the Yoorrook Justice Commission released its final report announcing that the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Victoria since colonisation was an act of genocide. The commission was created in 2021 by the Andrews government in Victoria, and this is Australia's first formal truth-telling inquiry and the first to be led by Indigenous people. And over the past 4 years, it's gathered testimonies from 200 witnesses and contributions from over 1,500 people, and it documented all of these atrocities dating back to 1831, when Victoria was first colonised. And this includes mass killings, cultural erasure, and removal of children from their families. Now, the report contains 100 recommendations aimed at addressing these systemic injustices, including financial compensation, land returns, and including Indigenous perspectives in education. So there is a lot that will come out of this, or should come out of this, including a push to make the First Peoples Assembly a permanent fixture in Victoria and working towards a treaty in Victoria. Now, there is going to be resistance to finding out about our history, but this is what has happened, and it is a story that just does need to be told, whether we like it or not.
The amount of apathy when it comes to this stuff distresses me. It really does.
And you are a historian, David.
And I'm a historian. My specialty isn't really Indigenous history, although I have touched on it in the past in delivering lectures and broader courses and stuff, because it's important. It's the oldest surviving society in the world as far as we can tell, 50 to 60,000 years old, and stuff keeps getting older. It is in many ways a triumphant story in that we still have Indigenous people who are preserving the culture as best as they can and integrating it into modern Australian culture. People getting upset at a welcome to country. I don't understand. It's 30 seconds. It might be 2 minutes, but it's important. We need to acknowledge that there was a genocide or an attempted genocide. Genocides are rarely successful in that 100% of the people are wiped out, but they are always appalling, disgusting, and should be condemned at every corner.
And there are those people that say, well, it can't be a genocide because Indigenous people still exist, but that's not the definition of genocide. It's about intent, it's about the policies, government programs and practices that are designed to destroy a certain group of people, culturally, spiritually, and physically. And that's exactly what took place in Australia.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the triumph of the Indigenous people, that they survive. But they survive at great and unthinkable cost. The oral histories where they talk about genocide. The last massacre was in 1931, and the Attorney General at the time, J.G. Latham, condemned it, as well he should have. So these things happen quite late, and oral histories from both sides match up, interestingly enough, which tends to suggest that these things were happening.
And this is also the first formal truth-telling commission in Australia. It's modelled on international efforts such as Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission and South Africa's truth-telling processes after the end of apartheid in 1990. But in Australia, Victoria is the only state or territory that has done this, and the federal government certainly hasn't done anything at all about this. The Queensland and the Northern Territory did start off the process of truth-telling, but they were both scrapped by the LNP and CLP governments when they returned to office last year. In some of the other states, it's all been a little bit stop-start, but no other state has got a standing commission committed to telling the full story. And the truth is always going to be difficult for some people to hear, but it's something that we do have to hear. The report does call out the acts of genocide, and that's a word that's always going to create some resistance in Australia for different reasons and by different groups as well. But by international definitions, especially those adopted by the United Nations, it does apply. In places like Tasmania, Western Australia and Queensland, there are actually official records that document that attempted removal and eradication of Indigenous peoples. So This report itself, well, that's been tabled, it's been released, it shouldn't be the end of it. It's supposed to be the beginning of the negotiations of a treaty, institutional reform, real justice, and it has to be all of those things. Good intentions contained within a report, well, they just pretty much mean nothing without action. Governments just have to stop dragging their feet on a lot of these issues.
We all know what the road to hell is paved with. And again, it goes down to bravery, it goes down to courage, it goes down to moral fortitude, that we need to acknowledge things were bad. And I know scholars like Keith Windshuttle say, there's no documentation. There's no documentation when you look at the official documents, but there's actually plenty when you look at the unofficial documents, when you look at where the oral histories match up, where you look at private letters, where you look at obscure paragraphs in local newspapers. It's all there, and the work has been done, not only by Henry Reynolds, but by many others too. Kevin Rudd understood that you needed some kind of atonement, so he did the apology, which was a great step at the time, but nothing followed from it, or very little followed from it. We need to start acknowledging things, and it's a small percentage of the population, but it's an important percentage of the population. And we need to fix things up and make things better. From my perspective, things have improved, but I don't want to say that definitively because my perspective is probably not the best perspective to live from. And they haven't improved much, but they have slightly improved, but they need to improve a lot more. And this type of thing, as painful as it is, as hard as it is, as awful as it is, we've got to stop looking at the descendants of the perpetrators as being victims. They're not guilty, now that's for sure, but the actions at that time had severe consequences, and we need to acknowledge this. And hopefully this commission will have the teeth to actually do something about it.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.